November 13, 1943. The Philippine Sea. The ocean is a void of pitch-black water merging seamlessly with the moonless sky. On the surface of this abyss, the U.S. Essex, a floating city of steel and gasoline, heaves slowly with the swell. The flight deck is slick with sea spray and the lingering residue of aviation fuel. It is 3:47 in the morning. This should be the quietest hour, the numb silence between the violence of yesterday and the carnage of tomorrow. But for aviation machinist, mate second class James Sweat, this silence is the loudest thing he has ever heard. Deep in the shadows of the hangar decks, Wet is doing something that could get him court-martialed. In a war zone, it might even get him shot. He is hiding behind a stack of crates, his eyes locked on a single F6F Hellcat fighter. His heart is hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. His palms are slick with cold sweat. He is not planning to sabotage the plane. He is not planning to defect. He is about to steal a fighter jet. He is about to commit grand theft of United States Navy property because he believes he is the only man on the ship who knows how to save it. Just hours ago, the Essex witnessed a horror that has become all too familiar. It was not a kamikaze attack. It was not a zero dogfight. It was a recovery operation, the safest part of the mission. The crew watched as a Hellcat, their Iron Bird, their protector, touched down on the deck and disintegrated into a fireball. There were no enemy tracers, no flak damage. Just a hard landing, a sudden rupture, and then an inferno. Since October, Task Force 38 has lost 47 pilots, not to the Japanese, but to their own fuel tanks. 47 men burned alive in their cockpits, while their shipmates watched helplessly from the catwalks. The Bureau of Aeronautics has spent 8 months investigating. Brightest minds from MIT and Caltech have crunched the numbers, producing thick manuals and complex retrofit orders, and yet the pilots keep dying. But James Sweat, standing in the dark with a serrated knife and a pile of stolen mattress foam, thinks the geniuses are wrong. He is 24 years old. He never finished high school. He is a mechanic from Terre Haute, Indiana, who learned everything he knows fixing tractors during the Great Depression. And tonight he is going to bet his life and his freedom that a pile of sponge is smarter than the entire Department of the Navy. To understand why a mechanic would risk treason to fix a plane, you have to understand the machine itself. The F6F Hellcat entered the war in 1943 with a legendary reputation. It was the Zero Killer. It was fast, heavily armed, and built like a tank. But its most touted feature was the self-sealing fuel tank. The concept was brilliant, a rubber bladder inside the tank that would automatically close up bullet holes like skin healing over a cut. In theory, it made the plane invincible. But by the summer of 1943, a deadly pattern emerged. The Hellcat was winning the war in the air with a kill ratio of 19-1. But bringing it home was becoming a game of Russian roulette. The pilots called it a controlled crash. You take a 20,000-pound metal beast and slam it onto a pitching deck at 90 knots, spraying the tail. Hook catches one of the 4 steel wires. It is a violent, bone-jarring stop. On October 3rd, the nightmare began in earnest. Lieutenant Robert Anderson was bringing his bird in on the USS Lexington. It was a textbook approach. Perfect glide slope. But the moment his hook snagged the number 3 wire, the violence of the deceleration did something invisible inside the fuselage. There was no spark, no warning. Just a pressure wave that ruptured the fuel system. The vapor ignited instantly. Anderson burned to death before the crash crew could even unspool their hoses. The Navy blamed pilot error. They said he came in too hot. They said he hit too hard. Then it happened again. October 14th, USS Bunker Hill. Ensign Charles Murphy, dead. October 22nd, USS Enterprise. Lieutenant James Fleming, dead. The panic began to spread through the ready rooms. These men were not afraid of the Japanese Imperial Navy. They were afraid of their own throttles. Every landing became a coin toss with the devil. The engineers back in Washington were frantic. They analyzed the wreckage and concluded it was the water hammer effect. Their theory was sound. When the plane stops abruptly, the liquid fuel slams forward like a sledgehammer, blowing out the front of the tank. Their solution reinforced everything. They sent out kits to install heavy steel brackets, stiffered amper springs, and high-pressure relief valves. They turned the fuel system into a fortress, but it did not work. The tanks kept exploding. The engineers were solving a math problem, but they were missing the reality of the physics. James Sweat did not know about fluid dynamics equations. He knew machines. He did not see blueprints, he saw behaviors. While the officers read reports, Sweat was crawling inside the charred, reeking fuselages of the wrecked planes. He spent his off-duty hours inside the boneyard, the twisted metal remains of the crashes. He lay inside the dark claustrophobic belly of the Hellcats, staring at the fuel tanks. He noticed something the engineers missed. If the water hammer theory was correct, the tanks should be bursting at the front or the bottom where the heavy fuel impacted. But Sweat saw that the ruptures were always at the top, near the filler cap. The rubber liners were not blown out, they were torn in. It looked like something had sucked the life out of them. Lying there in the dark, smelling the burned rubber and stale gasoline, Sweat replayed the crash in his mind. The plane hits the deck, 90 knots to zero. The fuel thousands of pounds of its urges forward. This creates a massive hydraulic slam at the front, yes, but what happens at the back? A vacuum. As the liquid rushes forward, it leaves a void behind it. Nature abhors a vacuum. Air tries to rush in through the vents to fill the space, but the self-sealing liner is soft. It is a flexible bladder. Before the air can equalize the pressure, that sudden violent vacuum sucks the liner inward. It collapses like a plastic bag with the air sucked out of it. Then a split second later, the fuel sloshes back. The liner is snapped outward. That violent cycle of implosion and explosion whip-snap the rubber tears. Once the liner tears, raw fuel vapor floods the fuselage cavity. The airframe is full of friction, static electricity, and hot metal. One spark is all it takes. Sweat sat up in the wreckage, his heart racing. It was not about pressure. It was about the void. The engineers were trying to build a stronger box, but they needed to stop the box from becoming empty. The solution hit him as he looked at a pile of discarded supplies in the corner of the hangar. Foam, rubber, old mattress padding. If you filled the tank with porous foam, the fuel would saturate it. The foam would hold the fuel in suspension like a sponge. But more importantly, the foam occupies the physical space. It prevents the fuel from sloshing violently. It prevents a large vacuum cavity from forming. If there is no large void, the liner cannot collapse. If it does not collapse, it does not tear. It was so simple, it was stupid. Sweat took his theory to the maintenance officer. He was laughed out of the room. You want to stuff garbage into a combat aircraft. The lieutenant sneered. We have PhDs working on this, Sweat. You stick to turning wrenches. But the bodies kept piling up. On November 12th, another pilot, William Edwards, died in a ball of fire. Sweat stood on the deck watching them hose the debris into the sea. The anger in his gut turned into cold resolve. He could not wait for permission anymore. He found Chief Petty Officer Michael Torres. Torres was a 15-year veteran, a man who had survived the early days of the war and had no patience for officer politics. Chief, I need 6 cubic feet of foam rubber, and I need access to a Hellcat. Torres looked at the kid. He saw the desperation, but he also saw the logic. Sweat explained the vacuum theory again. It was the only explanation that fit the forensic evidence. If we file a request, Torres said, lighting a cigarette to hide his nervousness, they will deny it. And if we touch a plane without a work order, that is sabotage. That is 20 years in Leavenworth. I know, Sweat said. But if we do not, 3 more guys die at dawn. Torres threw his cigarette into the dark water. Which plane? They chose number 42, a spare aircraft. For the next hour, a chief and a second-class mechanic committed mutiny in the shadows. They sliced up mattress foam. They soaked it in fire retardant. They painstakingly opened the access panels of the Hellcat fuel cells and stuffed the material inside strip by strip. It was grueling work. They were terrified of being caught by the master-at-arms. Every footstep on the steel deck sounded like a gunshot. By for Oaklock, the tank was full, but they could not test it on the ground. A static test would not create the G-forces of a carrier landing. It has to fly, Sweat said, wiping grease from his face. It has to hit the deck at full speed. You are not a pilot, Torres hissed. I have got 30 hours in the simulator. I know the procedures. Knowing the procedures and catching a wire at night are two different things. Chief, spin the prop. Torres looked at Sweat. He realized he was not going to stop him. This kid was either going to save the Navy or destroy himself. Torres signaled the start. The inertia started wind, a low groan rising to a scream. The engine caught with a belch of blue smoke. James Sweat, a man who had never flown a real aircraft, strapped himself into the cockpit of the most powerful fighter in the Pacific. He was not thinking about the court-martial. He was thinking about the vacuum inside the tank. He checked his gauges. He looked at Torres one last time. The chief pulled the chocks. Sweat pushed the throttle forward. The F6F Hellcat screams off the bow of the USSS, exclawing for altitude. Inside the cockpit, James Sweat is fighting for control. He is not a pilot. He is a mechanic who has only ever flown a desk in a training simulator. The G-force of the takeoff slams him back into his seat. For a terrifying moment, the aircraft dips toward the black water before the lift catches the wings. He is airborne. For the next 10 minutes, the Essex is in chaos. Radar operators are screaming about an unidentified contact. Anti-aircraft gunners are tracking the noise in the dark, fingers hovering over triggers. But up in the sky, Sweat is doing the only thing that matters. He is burning fuel. He needs to lower the fuel level to create that deadly void inside the tanks. He needs to recreate the exact conditions. He is deliberately setting the stage for an explosion. At 4:30, Sweat banks the fighter around. He can see the faint wake of the carrier in the starlight. He lines up for the approach. This is the moment of truth. He does not have the finesse of a combat veteran. He comes in fast to fast. The landing signal officer on the fantail is frantically waving his paddles, signaling a wave off, screaming into the wind for the idiot to abort. Sweat ignores him. He cuts the throttle. The Hellcat drops like a stone. It slams onto the flight deck with a violence that shakes the steel plates. The tail hook scrapes across the wooden metal, sparking wildly until it snags the number 2 wire. The arresting gear screams as it pays out, dragging the 20,000-pound aircraft from 100 miles an hour to a dead stop in less than 3 seconds. The fuel inside the tank surges forward like a tidal wave. The vacuum forms instantly behind it. The rubber liner is sucked inward, collapsing in the void. Then the fuel slams back. On the catwalks, the crash crews flinch, turning their heads away, waiting for the blinding flash of the explosion. They wait for the heat. They wait for the scream of twisting metal. But there is only silence. The Hellcat sits motionless on the wire. The propeller spins down to a halt. There is no fire. There is no explosion. The foam rubber inside the tanks has done its job. It absorbed the fuel, occupied the empty space, and prevented the vacuum from tearing the liner apart. The physics of death have been defeated by a mattress. Sweat's lumps in the cockpit, gasping for air, his hands shaking uncontrollably on the stick. Before he can even unbuckle, the canopy is ripped open. He looks up into the barrels of sidearms and the furious face of Commander David McCampbell, the Air Group Commander. "Get out of that plane," McCampbell roars, his face purple with rage. "You are under arrest for mutiny, theft, and reckless endangerment. You could have killed everyone on this deck." Marines drag Sweat out of the cockpit and throw him onto the steel deck. He is roughly handled, his face pressed against the cold metal, but he starts laughing. It is a manic, hysterical laugh. It did not blow, Sweat wheezes, pointing a grease-stained finger at the plane commander. Look, it did not blow. McCampbell is about to order him taken to the brig when a voice cuts through the noise. "Stand down." It is Captain Ralph Waller, the skipper of the Essex. He pushes through the circle of angry officers. He looks at the trembling mechanic and then at the aircraft that should be a burning wreck. Captain Waller is a pragmatist. He knows that landing was violent enough to rupture any tank on the ship. Yet the plane is intact, let him speak, Waller orders. Sweat stands up, wiping blood from a cut on his lips. On is not the impact, it is the vacuum. When we stop, the fuel moves, and the air cannot fill the gap fast enough. The liner implodes in tears. Then the spark hits the vapor. I filled the voids with foam rubber. It stops the sloshing. It stops the vacuum. No vacuum, no tear. No tear, no fire. The logic is undeniable. It cuts through 8 months of over-engineering by the Bureau of Aeronautics in a single sentence. Captain Waller looks at the plane, then at his chief engineer. Verify it. For the next 48 hours, the USS Essex becomes a testing ground. Admiral John McCain, commander of the task force, hears the report and orders an immediate live-fire test. They rig 6 Hellcats with Sweat's foam modification and fly them against 6 standard planes. 12 brave pilots volunteer to slam these birds onto the deck as hard as possible. The results are terrifyingly clear. 2 of the standard planes suffer tank ruptures during the test. The foam-filled planes 0 failures, 0 leaks, 0 fires. When the engine ears strip down the tanks, the rubber liners are pristine. The report shoots up the chain of command like a rocket. The Navy issues a fleet-wide technical order. Every F6F Hellcat and Def for you Corsair is to be immediately retrofitted with reticulated foam. The impact is instantaneous. From December 1943 to May 1940, for the survival rate of carrier landings skyrockets. Hundreds of pilots who would have burned to death in operational accidents survive to fly another day. The Zero killer finally stops killing its own masters. Years later, after the war ended, Allied intelligence recovered a classified report from the German Luftwaffe. The German engineers were baffled by the durability of American fighters. The report read the enemy aircraft possess a mystical resistance to fire. Even when fuel cells are penetrated by unfire, they do not. The Americans have overcome a physical barrier we cannot comprehend. They did not know the barrier was overcome by a high school dropout from Indiana using scraps of bedding. As for James Sweat, he did not get a parade. Captain Waller dropped the charges, marking the incident as emergency technical repairs. But the Navy was not keen on advertising that a mechanic had outsmarted their entire engineering department. Sweat finished his tour honorably discharged in 1945 and went back to Terre Haute. He opened his auto repair shop. He fixed transmissions and changed oil. He grew old raising a family who knew him only as a quiet, hard-working dad. He never bragged. He never told his customers that the safety feature now standard in race cars and military aircraft was born in a stolen moment of courage. It was not until 1991, 48 years after that night, that a naval historian uncovered the deck logs. The Navy finally decided to set the record straight. In a ceremony at the Pentagon, a frail, white-haired James Sweat stood to receive the Legion of Merit. The citation read for extraordinary courage, lighting the way home for countless aviators. When the applause washed over him, the old mechanic just smiled. He was not thinking about the medal. He was thinking about the silence on the flight deck, the beautiful, heavy silence of a plane that did not explode. He was thinking about the boys who got to grow old because he decided to break the rules. James Sweat proved that sometimes the experts are wrong. Sometimes the solution is not in the textbook. And sometimes to save the ship, you have to steal the plane. If you want more hardcore breakdowns of history's deadliest miscalculations, smash that like button and subscribe. I am your strategy observer. I will see you on the next battlefield.